George Walton Lucas, Jr., is an American filmmaker and entrepreneur. He is best known as the creator of the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises, as well as the founder of Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic. He led Lucasfilm as chairman and chief executive before selling it to the Walt Disney Company in 2012. Upon graduating from the University of Southern California in 1967, Lucas co-founded American Zoetrope with fellow filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola. He wrote and directed THX 1138, based on his earlier student short Electronic Labyrinth. THX 1138 4EB, which was a critical success but a financial failure. Lucas's next work as a writer-director was the film American Graffiti, inspired by his teen years in early 1960s Modesto, California, and produced through the newly founded Lucasfilm. The film was critically and commercially successful, and received 5 Academy Award nominations including Best Picture. Lucas's next film, an epic space opera then titled Star Wars, went through a troubled production process, but was a surprise hit, becoming the highest-grossing film at the time as well as a winner of 6 Academy Awards and a cultural phenomenon. Following the first Star Wars film, Lucas only produced and co-wrote the following installments in the trilogy: The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Along with Steven Spielberg, he co-created and wrote the Indiana Jones films Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade. Lucas also produced a variety of films through Lucasfilm in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1997, Lucas re-released the original Star Wars trilogy as part of a special edition, where he made several alterations to the films. These were followed by further changes for home media releases in 2004 and 2011. In 1999, Lucas returned to directing with the Star Wars prequel trilogy, consisting of The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. He later wrote the Indiana Jones sequel Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and served as the story writer and executive producer for the war film Red Tails. Lucas is one of the American film industry's most financially successful filmmakers, and has been personally nominated for 4 Academy Awards. He is also considered a significant figure in the New Hollywood era. Early life. Lucas was born and raised in Modesto, California, the son of Dorothea Lenore Lucas and George Walton Lucas, Sr., who owned a stationery store. He is of German, Swiss German, English, Scottish, and distant Dutch and French descent. Growing up, Lucas had a passion for cars and motor racing, which would eventually serve as inspiration for his films 1 hour 42 minutes and 8 seconds and American Graffiti. Long before Lucas became obsessed with filmmaking, he wanted to be a race car driver, and he spent most of his high school years racing on the underground circuit at fairgrounds and hanging out at garages. On June 12, 1962, while driving his souped-up auto Bianchi Bean China, another driver broadsided him, flipping over his car, nearly killing him, causing him to lose interest in racing as a career. He attended Modesto Junior College, where he studied anthropology, sociology, and literature, amongst other subjects. He also began shooting with an 8mm camera, including filming car races. At this time, Lucas and his friend John Plummer became interested in canyon cinema, screenings of underground, avant-garde 16mm filmmakers like Jordan Belson, Stan Brakhage and Bruce Conner. Lucas and Plummer also saw classic European films of the time, including Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, François Truffaut's Jules et Jim, and Federico Fellini's 8½. That's when George really started exploring, Plummer said. Through his interest in autocross racing, Lucas met renowned cinematographer Haskell Wexler, another race enthusiast. Wexler, later to work with Lucas on several occasions, was impressed by Lucas' talent. George had a very good eye, and he thought visually, he recalled. Lucas then transferred to the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. USC was one of the earliest universities to have a school devoted to motion picture film. During the years at USC, Lucas shared a dorm room with Randall Kleiser, along with classmates such as Walter Murch, Hal Barwood and John Milius. They became a clique of film students known as the Dirty Dozen. He also became good friends with fellow acclaimed student filmmaker and future Indiana Jones collaborator, Steven Spielberg. Lucas was deeply influenced by the filmic expression course taught at the school by filmmaker Lester Nobros, which concentrated on the non-narrative elements of film form like color, light, movement, space, and time. Another inspiration was the Serbian montagist Slavko Vorkopic, a film theoretician who made stunning montage sequences for Hollywood studio features at MGM, RKO, and Paramount. Vorkopic taught the autonomous nature of the cinematic art form, emphasizing the unique dynamic quality of movement and kinetic energy inherent in motion pictures. Film career 1965 to 71. Early career. Lucas saw many inspiring films in class, particularly the visual films coming out of the National Film Board of Canada like Arthur Lipsitz's 21 to 87. The French-Canadian cameraman Jean-Claude Labrec's Cinema Verite 60 Cycles, the work of Norman McLaren, and the documentaries of Claude Hutre. Lucas fell madly in love with pure cinema and quickly became prolific at making 16mm non-story, non-character visual tone poems and Cinema Verite with such titles as Look at Life, Herbie, 1 hours 42 minutes and 8 seconds, The Emperor, Anyone Lived in a Pretty Town, Filmmaker, and June 1867. He was passionate and interested in camera work and editing, defining himself as a filmmaker as opposed to being a director, and he loved making abstract visual films that created emotions purely through cinema. After graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film in 1967, he tried joining the United States Air Force as an officer, but he was immediately turned down because of his numerous speeding tickets. He was later drafted by the Army for military service in Vietnam, but he was exempted from service after medical tests showed he had diabetes, the disease that killed his paternal grandfather. In 1967, Lucas re-enrolled as a USC graduate student in film production, working as a teaching instructor for a class of U.S. Navy students who were being taught documentary cinematography. Lucas directed the short film Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138-4EB, which won first prize at the 1967-68 National Student Film Festival, and was later adapted into his first full-length feature film, THX 1138. Lucas was awarded a student scholarship by Warner Brothers to observe and work on the making of a film of his choosing. The film he chose was Finian's Rainbow, which was being directed by Francis Ford Coppola, who was revered among film school students of the time as a cinema graduate who had made it in Hollywood. In 1969, Lucas was one of the camera operators on the classic Rolling Stones concert film Gimme Shelter, 1971-77. THX 1138, American Graffiti, and Star Wars. Lucas co-founded the studio American Zoetrope with Coppola, whom he met during his internship at Warner Brothers, hoping to create a liberating environment for filmmakers to direct outside the perceived oppressive control of the Hollywood studio system. His first full-length feature film produced by the studio, THX 1138, was not a success. Lucas then created his own company, Lucasfilm Limited, and directed American Graffiti. Lucas's newfound wealth and reputation enabled him to develop a story set in space. Even so, he encountered difficulties getting Star Wars made. It was only because Alan Ladd, Jr., at 20th Century Fox liked American Graffiti that he forced through a production and distribution deal for the film, which ended up restoring Fox to financial stability after a number of flops. Star Wars quickly became the highest-grossing film of all time, displaced 5 years later by Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. After the success of American Graffiti and prior to the beginning of filming on Star Wars, Lucas was encouraged to renegotiate for a higher fee for writing and directing Star Wars than the $150,000 agreed. He declined to do so, instead negotiating for advantage in some of the as-yet unspecified parts of his contract with Fox, in particular ownership of licensing and merchandising rights and contractual arrangements for sequels. The studio was unconcerned to relinquish these rights, as its last major attempt in the field, with the 1967 film, Dr. Dolittle, had proved a discouraging failure. Lucas exploited merchandising rights wisely, and Lucasfilm has earned hundreds of millions of dollars from licensed games, toys, and collectibles created for the franchise. 1977 to 99. Hiatus from directing Indiana Jones. Over the 2 decades after the first Star Wars film, Lucas worked extensively as a writer and/or producer, including the many Star Wars spin-offs made for film, TV, and other media. Lucas acted as executive producer for the next 2 Star Wars films, commissioning Irvin Kershner to direct The Empire Strikes Back and Richard Marquand to direct Return of the Jedi, while receiving a story credit on the former and sharing a screenwriting credit with Lawrence Kasdan on the latter. He also acted as executive producer and story writer on all 4 of the Indiana Jones films, which he convinced his colleague and good friend, Steven Spielberg, to direct. Other successful projects where Lucas acted as a producer or executive producer in this period include Kurosawa's Kagemusha, Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat, Jim Henson's Labyrinth, Godfrey Reggio's Power Kart C, and the animated film The Land Before Time. There were less successful projects, however, including more American Graffiti, The Ill-Fated Howard the Duck, which was the biggest flop of his career, Willow, and Coppola's Tucker, The Man and His Dream. From 1992 to 1996, Lucas served as executive producer for the Indiana Jones television spin-off The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. In 1997, as part of the 20th anniversary of Star Wars, Lucas returned to the original trilogy and made numerous modifications using newly available digital technology, releasing them in theaters as the Star Wars Special Edition. For DVD releases in 2004 and Blu-ray releases in 2011, the trilogy received further revisions to make them congruent with the prequel trilogy. Besides the additions to the Star Wars franchise, Lucas released a director's cut of THX 1138 in 2004, with the film recut and containing a number of CGI revisions. The animation studio Pixar was founded as the graphics group, 1/3 of the computer division of Lucasfilm. Pixar's early computer graphics research resulted in groundbreaking effects in films such as Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan and Young Sherlock Holmes, and the group was purchased in 1986 by Steve Jobs shortly after he left Apple Computer. Jobs paid Lucas $5 million and put $5 million as capital into the company. The sale reflected Lucas' desire to stop the cash flow losses from his 7-year research projects associated with new entertainment technology tools, as well as his company's new focus on creating entertainment products rather than tools. A contributing factor was cash flow difficulties following Lucas' 1983 divorce concurrent with the sudden drop-off in revenues from Star Wars licenses. Following the release of Return of the Jedi, the sound-equipped system, THX Limited, was founded by Lucas and Tomlinson Holman. The company was formerly owned by Lucasfilm, and contains equipment for stereo, digital, and theatrical sound for films and music. Skywalker Sound and Industrial Light and Magic are the sound and visual effects subdivisions of Lucasfilm, while Lucasfilm Games, later renamed LucasArts, produces products for the gaming industry. 1999 to 2012. Return to directing. Returned to Star Wars and Indiana Jones after losing much of his fortune in a divorce settlement in 1987. Lucas had no desire to return to Star Wars, and had unofficially cancelled his sequel trilogy by the time of Return of the Jedi. Nevertheless, the prequels, which were only still a series of basic ideas partially pulled from his original drafts of the Star Wars, continued to fascinate him, with the possibilities of technical advances would make it possible to revisit his 20-year-old material. After Star Wars became popular once again, in the wake of Dark Horse's comic book line and Timothy Zahn's trilogy of novels, Lucas saw that there was still a large audience. His children were older, and with the explosion of CGI technology he was now considering returning to directing. By 1993, it was announced, in Variety among other sources, that he would be making the prequels. He began penning more to the story, now indicating the series would be a tragic one examining Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side. Lucas also began to change how the prequels would exist relative to the originals. At first they were supposed to be a filling in of history, tangential to the originals. But now he saw that they could form the beginning of one long story that started with Anakin's childhood and ended with his death. This was the final step towards turning the film series into a saga. In 1994, Lucas began work on the screenplay of the first prequel, tentatively titled Episode I, The Beginning. It was finished and released in 1999 as Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace, which would be the first film he had directed in over 2 decades. Following the release of the first prequel, Lucas announced that he would also be directing the next 2, and began working on Episode II. The first draft of Episode II was completed just weeks before principal photography, and Lucas hired Jonathan Hales, a writer from the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, to polish it. It was completed and released in 2002 as Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones. The final prequel, Star Wars Episode III, Revenge of the Sith, began production in 2002 and was released in 2005. Numerous fans and critics considered the prequels inferior to the original trilogy, though they were box office successes nonetheless. From 2003 to 2005, Lucas also served as an executive producer on Star Wars: Clone Wars, an animated microseries on Cartoon Network created by Genndy Tartakovsky, that bridged the events between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Like the Star Wars prequels, reception was mixed, with numerous fans and critics once again considering it inferior to its predecessors. From 2008 to 2014, Lucas also served as the executive producer for Star Wars: The Clone Wars, another Star Wars animated series on Cartoon Network, which was preceded by a feature film of the same name. In 2012, Lucas served as the story writer and executive producer for the 2012 film Red Tails, a war film based on the exploits of the Tuskegee Airmen, a group of African-American pilots in the United States Army Air Force during the Second World War. He also took over direction of reshoots while director Anthony Hemingway worked on other projects. 2012-present. Semi-retirement. I'm moving away from the business, from the company, from all this kind of stuff. George Lucas on his future career plans. In January 2012, Lucas announced his retirement from producing large-scale blockbuster films and instead refocusing his career on smaller, independently budgeted features. He did not specify whether or not this would affect his involvement with the 5th installment of the Indiana Jones series. In June 2012, it was announced that producer Kathleen Kennedy, a long-term collaborator with Steven Spielberg and a producer of the Indiana Jones films, had been appointed as co-chair of Lucasfilm Limited. It was reported that Kennedy would work alongside Lucas, who would remain chief executive and serve as co-chairman for at least 1 year, after which she would succeed him as the company's sole leader. With the sale of Lucasfilm to Disney, Lucas is currently Disney's second-largest single shareholder after the estate of Steve Jobs. As of 2014, he is working as a creative consultant on the Star Wars sequel trilogy, with the first movie, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, having been released on December 18, 2015. J.J. Abrams directed The Force Awakens, while Kathleen Kennedy executive produced, and will do so for all future Star Wars films. The new sequel trilogy is being jointly produced by Lucasfilm and the Walt Disney Company, which had acquired Lucasfilm in 2012. As creative consultant on the film, Lucas's involvement included attending early story meetings. According to Lucas, "I mostly say, you can't do this. You can do that. You know, the cars don't have wheels. They fly with anti-gravity. There's a million little pieces. I know all that stuff." Lucas's son Jet told The Guardian that his father was very torn about having sold the rights to the franchise, despite having hand-picked Abrams to direct, and that his father was there to guide, but that he wants to let it go and become its new generation. Among the materials turned over to the production team were rough story treatments Lucas developed when he considered creating Episode 7ix himself years earlier. In January 2015, Lucas stated that Disney had discarded his story ideas. In 2015, Lucas wrote the CGI film Strange Magic, his first musical. The film was produced at Skywalker Ranch. Gary Rydstrom directed the movie.